The first time I saw Dr. Mira Hastings, she was picking food out of her teeth with a data stylus while the entire Galactic Council waited for her to begin her presentation. Let me back up. My name is Chixtel, Senior Xenolinguist for the Velcara Research Consortium, and I have spent the last 217 cycles trying to decode what we called the Orath manuscripts. 217 cycles. That is approximately 400 of your Earth years, give or take a solar revolution. I had dedicated my entire existence to understanding these ancient texts that predated every known civilization in our galaxy by at least 50,000 years. The manuscripts were gorgeous, I will give them that. Elegant symbols that seemed to dance across preserved metallic sheets, discovered in a derelict vessel floating near the Horsehead Nebula. The ship itself had been reduced to cosmic dust, but these documents? Pristine. Perfect. Mocking us with their beauty and their absolute, infuriating incomprehensibility. We threw everything at them. Quantum linguistic matrices, probability algorithms, even that experimental consciousness transfer technology that made poor Zelmon think he was a flowering plant for 3 weeks. Nothing worked. The symbols remained stubbornly, magnificently meaningless. Then the humans showed up. Not in a dramatic way, mind you. They just sort of appeared. One day. Their first contact with the Council had been refreshingly mundane. No weapons, no threats, just a somewhat battered vessel that looked like someone had built it in their garage, which, as it turned out, was exactly what had happened. The ship was called the Persistent Optimist, which should have told us everything we needed to know about humanity right there. But I digress. The Council, in their infinite wisdom, or perhaps their infinite desperation, decided to invite representatives from every member species to examine the Orath manuscripts, including the humans who had been part of the galactic community for exactly 6 solar months. 6 months. And they thought they could solve what had stumped the greatest minds in the galaxy for literal centuries. The audacity was almost admirable. So there I was, standing in the Grand Archive on Velcara Station, watching as species after species filed in to view the manuscripts. The Thorians came with their 12 sensory appendages and their superiority complex. The Quicks brought crystalline processors that could perform more calculations per second than there were atoms in a small moon. The Veltorians arrived with what they claimed was ancient wisdom passed down through genetic memory. All of them failed, of course, just like I had failed, just like everyone had failed. Then she walked in. Dr. Mira Hastings was not what I expected. Then again, I am not sure what I was expecting from humanity's representative. Perhaps someone tall and imposing? Someone who radiated intellectual superiority? Someone who, at minimum, was not wearing what appeared to be footwear held together with some sort of primitive adhesive tape? She was average height for a human, with dark hair pulled back in what I later learned was called a messy bun, which seemed to be less of a style choice and more of a "I forgot to brush my hair" situation. Her clothing was wrinkled, suggesting she had either slept in it or simply did not care about appearances. Probably both. She carried a battered bag that looked older than some civilizations and wore glasses that kept sliding down her nose, which she would push back up with her middle finger in a gesture that I learned was slightly rude in human culture. She was, in short, a disaster. I loved her immediately. Not romantically, you understand. I am a Velcarian. We reproduce via spore distribution during the rainy season. No, I loved her in the way you love watching a small creature attempt to fight something much larger than itself, with fascination and a bit of concern for its well-being. Right then, she said, approaching the display case containing the manuscripts. Her voice had an accent I could not place, all sharp consonants and swallowed vowels. These are the famous mystery texts everyone is losing their minds over? Ambassador Thexlon, who was overseeing the viewing, puffed up his vocal sac in indignation. These are the Orath manuscripts, one of the most significant archaeological discoveries in galactic history. Sure, Mira said, waving a hand dismissively. Mind if I take a closer look? Before anyone could respond, she had already pressed her face against the containment field, squinting at the symbols with an intensity that suggested either deep concentration or severe nearsightedness, possibly both. I moved closer, curious despite myself. Dr. Hastings, I should inform you that the finest linguistic experts in the galaxy have been unable to decipher these texts. We have employed every known method of cryptographic analysis, pattern recognition, and semantic reconstruction. She did not look at me, still studying the manuscripts. Yeah, I bet you have. There was something in her tone. Not mockery, exactly. More like amusement? As if we had all missed something obvious. I continued, slightly offended now. We have been extremely thorough. The complexity of these symbols suggests a sophisticated civilization with advanced abstract reasoning capabilities. The grammatical structure alone implies at least 17 distinct verb tenses and a case system that would make the Thorian language look simple. She had pulled out a small device from her bag, some sort of primitive scanning tool. And you are absolutely certain these predate known galactic civilizations? Positive? Ambassador Thexlon interjected. Carbon dating, quantum decay analysis, even temporal resonance scanning all confirm these documents are at least 50,000 years old. Mira nodded slowly, still not looking away from the manuscripts. Then she did something that made every being in the room freeze. She laughed. Not a polite chuckle or a nervous giggle, a full, genuine laugh that echoed through the Grand Archive like a sonic weapon. She laughed so hard she had to steady herself against the display case, tears forming at the corners of her eyes. "Oh, this is brilliant," she gasped between fits of laughter. "This is absolutely brilliant!" Thexlon's vocal sac had turned a deep purple, a sure sign of extreme agitation. "Dr. Hastings, I fail to see what is amusing about our greatest archaeological mystery." She wiped her eyes, finally turning to look at us. There was a grin on her face that made me deeply nervous. "You want to know what is funny? I will tell you what is funny. You lot have spent centuries trying to decode these ancient texts with all your fancy technology and linguistic expertise." "Yes," I said slowly. "That is correct. Did any of you?" She paused, the grin widening. "And I mean any of you, think to check if they were actually ancient?" The silence that followed was deafening. "I beg your pardon?" I managed. Mira pulled out another device, this one looking even more primitive than the first. "Your dating methods are all top-notch, I am sure. Very impressive. But here is the thing about humans. We have been mucking about in space for a lot longer than you think. Not officially, mind you. Just mucking about." She tapped her scanner. "These manuscripts? They are not 50,000 years old. The materials are 50,000 years old, sure. Probably salvaged from some actual ancient civilization. But the writing?" She paused for dramatic effect. "The writing is about 300 years old. Give or take a decade." The room erupted. Thexlon was making a noise like a deflating balloon. The Thorian representative began shouting in at least 6 different languages simultaneously. Even I felt my equilibrium, sacs vibrating with distress. "That is impossible," I said. Though even as the words left my mouth, I realized how many times I had said that about humanity in the past 6 months. Our analysis was exhaustive. "Oh, I don't doubt it," Mira said cheerfully. "But you were analyzing the wrong thing. You were so focused on the materials and the symbols themselves that you never bothered to check the linguistic patterns against known languages." "There are no matches in any database," I protested. "Not in your databases, no." She was grinning again, and I was beginning to understand that this was a very dangerous expression on a human. "But you see, We humans have this nasty habit of not telling each other what we are doing, especially when what we are doing is technically illegal, morally questionable, or just really, really stupid." She turned back to the manuscripts. "These symbols? This is not an alien language. This is a constructed language created by a human project called the Orath Initiative. It was a privately funded expedition from Earth, back when we were barely capable of leaving our own solar system. Some billionaire with more money than sense decided to fund a deep space expedition using experimental drive technology that may or may not have been stolen from a government research facility." I felt my tertiary brain beginning to ache. "You are saying humans created these manuscripts?" "Not just any humans," Mira said. "One specific human." "Would you like to know how I know?" No one spoke. We were all too stunned. She pulled out yet another device, this one looking suspiciously like it was held together with wire and hope. After a moment of fiddling with it, a holographic display appeared, showing what looked like human writing. "This," she said, pointing to the display, "is my grandmother's signature, Elizabeth Hastings, chief linguist of the Orath Initiative. She created this language as a way to encode the expedition's findings so that if anyone else found them, they would not be able to understand them without the key." The room had gone from chaotic to dead silent. "Your grandmother," Thexlon repeated weakly. "Yep. Gran was always a bit paranoid. Smart, but paranoid. She figured, if they discovered something valuable out there, she did not want just anyone being able to read their reports. So she created an entirely new language, wrote everything in it, and stored the key in the one place she knew it would be safe." "Where?" I asked, though I suspected I already knew the answer. Mira tapped her temple. "In the family. Passed down verbally, never written down. Just stories and lessons and bits of grammar, disguised as bedtime tales. I did not even realize what I was learning, until I was in university and decided to map it out for fun." She shrugged. "Turns out, Gran was teaching me an alien language that was not actually alien." I looked at the manuscripts with new eyes. All that work, all those years, all those theories and hypotheses and failed attempts at translation. "So," I said carefully, "you can read these?" "Oh yeah," Mira said casually. "It is basically a diary. Gran and her team found some abandoned outposts, took a bunch of samples, and wrote down their observations. Pretty dry stuff, honestly. Lot of commentary about how the coffee rations were insufficient, and someone named Marcus kept using all the hot water for showers. The Thorian representative made a sound like grinding metal. Centuries. We have spent centuries on this." "Yeah?" Mira said, and there was genuine sympathy in her voice now. "That has got to sting. If it helps, Gran would have thought this was hilarious. She always said the best code was the one that looked impossibly complex, but was actually dead simple if you had the right perspective." I felt something between horror and admiration. Why did no one notice? When your grandmother's expedition returned, surely they filed reports. Mira's expression shifted to something more somber. They did not return. The Orath Initiative was declared lost, with all hands, about 280 years ago. These manuscripts are probably the only proof they even made it out as far as they did. Never knew her. She left Earth before my mother was even born. But Mom taught me the stories and the language, and always said that someday we would find out what happened to Gran's expedition. She looked back at the manuscripts. Guess today is that day. Thexlon had recovered enough to speak. This is a disaster. Do you have any idea how many papers have been written about these manuscripts? How many careers have been built on studying them? Probably about the same number that will be built on this revelation, Mira said. Look, I get it. This is embarrassing. But it is also kind of amazing, right? Your advanced civilization, with all its technology and expertise, stumped by 300-year-old human paranoia and a grandmother's bedtime stories. She had a point, though I was not ready to admit it yet. "Will you translate them?" I asked. "The manuscripts?" Mira considered this. "I could. But here is the thing. Gran went through a lot of trouble to keep this information secret. Maybe there was a good reason for that. Maybe there is something in these texts that should not be public knowledge. Or maybe," suggested one of the Quick's representatives, "your grandmother was simply being unnecessarily cautious, and there is nothing of value in them at all." "Could be," Mira agreed. "Only one way to find out, I suppose." She reached into her bag again, this time pulling out what looked like an actual paper notebook. Actual paper. In the age of quantum storage and neural interfaces, this human had brought paper. "Tell you what," she said, flipping the notebook open. "I will read through them first, get a sense of what we are dealing with. Then we can decide together what information should be shared and what should stay private. Fair?" It was not fair, not really. But looking at her face, at the determination mixed with genuine concern, I found myself nodding. Fair. And that was how humanity's first major contribution to galactic society began. Not with advanced technology or military might, or even diplomatic brilliance, but with a rumpled academic in taped-together shoes, carrying her grandmother's secrets in her head and a notebook in her hands. I should have known then that things were about to get much, much more complicated. I really should have known. But in my defense, nothing in 217 cycles of careful academic study had prepared me for Dr. Mira Hastings and the chaos that followed her like a loyal pet. Nothing at all. 3 days after Mira Hastings revealed the truth about the Orath manuscripts, she disappeared. Not in a mysterious, abducted by shadow organizations kind of way. More in a, I have locked myself in my quarters with 17 pots of coffee and a do not disturb sign kind of way. The sign, I should mention, was written in 14 different languages, including 2 that she had apparently invented on the spot, just to be thorough. I tried to be patient. I really did. But by day 4, my curiosity had evolved into something closer to desperate need. What had she found in those manuscripts? What secrets had her grandmother hidden in plain sight for 3 centuries? So I did what any reasonable xenolinguist would do. I hacked her door panel. Oh, for the love of! Mira looked up from a nest of papers, food containers, and what appeared to be a wall covered entirely in sticky notes. Her hair had achieved new levels of chaos, and I was fairly certain she was wearing the same clothes from 4 days ago. Does nobody respect basic privacy protocols anymore? "You have been in here for 96 hours, I said, stepping over a precarious stack of reference materials. "The council is getting anxious. The council can wait." She shoved her glasses up her nose, leaving a smudge of what looked like chocolate. "This is Chixtel. This is bigger than I thought." My equilibrium sacs did a little flip of excitement. "What did you find?" She gestured at the wall of notes. Gran did not just document abandoned outposts, she found evidence of the Forerunners. I blinked all 3 of my primary eyes. The Forerunners are a myth. Yeah, well, so were humans until 6 months ago, and look how that turned out. She grabbed a handful of papers. According to these manuscripts, Gran's team found actual Forerunner technology, working technology, and they figured out how to use it. The Forerunners. Every species had legends about them. The ancient civilization that supposedly seeded the galaxy with life, left behind impossible technologies, and then vanished without a trace. Most serious scientists dismissed them as fairy tales, the galactic equivalent of bedtime stories. "That is impossible," I said, then immediately regretted it. That phrase never seemed to apply where humans were concerned. See, that is what I thought too. But Gran was meticulous. She documented everything. Coordinates, technical specifications, even safety warnings. Mira pulled out a specific page from her notebook. Want to know the really funny part? I was not sure I did, but I nodded anyway. The Forerunner technology? It is everywhere. You lot have been using it for millennia without even realizing it. Explain. She stood up, stretching with several alarming popping sounds. Okay, so you know how every spacefaring species in the galaxy uses basically the same fundamental principles for faster-than-light travel? Different implementations, sure, but the core physics are identical? Yes, that is one of the great mysteries of galactic science. The convergence theory suggests. The convergence theory is wrong, Mira interrupted. It is not convergent evolution. It is reverse engineering. Every civilization that achieved space travel did it by finding Forerunner artifacts and copying them. You all just forgot that is what you were doing because it happened so long ago. I felt my tertiary brain starting to overheat. That would mean our entire technological foundation is based on stolen homework. Yeah. She grinned, but there was no mockery in it. Gran's team figured this out because they found one of the original caches, a Forerunner archive, completely intact. And inside, they found the instruction manual. For what? For everything. She spread her arms wide. FTL drives, artificial gravity, energy shields, universal translators, in the works. All neatly documented in a language that, according to Gran, looked suspiciously like it was designed to be learned by species with developing spaceflight capabilities. I sat down heavily on what I hoped was a chair, and not just a pile of more papers. Why would the Forerunners do that? No idea. Gran had some theories, but Mira's expression shifted to something more serious. Here is where it gets complicated. The archive had a warning, a big, flashing, "Do not proceed beyond this point" kind of warning. Did they proceed? What do you think? Of course they proceeded. They were human scientists, with access to the greatest archaeological find in history, and the collective impulse control of a caffeinated squirrel. She sat back down, suddenly looking very tired. They found something else. Something Gran called the Nexus, which is a network. A galaxy-spanning communication and transportation system that connects every Forerunner site. Still active, still functional, still waiting for someone to flip the switch. She looked at me directly. Gran's team turned it on. Oh no. What happened? They got a response. Mira's voice had gone quiet. Not from the Forerunners. From something else? Something that had been waiting in the network for a very, very long time. What kind of something? Gran was not entirely clear on that. Her notes get pretty frantic toward the end. But whatever it was, it scared her enough that she shut down the Nexus, encrypted all their findings, and tried to make it back to Earth to warn people. She paused. Obviously, they did not make it. I processed this information, feeling each piece of it slot into place, like the universe's worst puzzle. The manuscripts were not just a diary. No, they are a warning, and instructions on how to permanently shut down the Nexus before anyone else tries to use it. She held up a page covered in her grandmother's encoded script. But here is the problem. Shutting it down requires accessing 3 different Forerunner sites simultaneously. Sites that are spread across the galaxy. And it needs to be done by someone who understands the language, the technology, and the specific shutdown sequence. Me. She did not look happy about it. Gran designed the whole system so that only someone who knew her private language could do it. I think she hoped that eventually someone from the family would find this and finish what she started. I stood up, pacing around the small space. We need to inform the council. No! Mira jumped up, grabbing my arm with surprising strength. What do you think will happen if we tell the council that there is a galaxy-wide network of Forerunner technology just waiting to be accessed? They will not want to shut it down. They will want to study it, use it, exploit it. Not if they know about the danger. You have more faith in politicians than I do. She released my arm, running her hands through her already chaotic hair. Look, I have been analyzing Grand's notes. Whatever responded to them in the Nexus, it was intelligent. And it was hostile. She described it as hungry and vast and patient. You think it is still there. I think it has been there for thousands of years, waiting for someone to turn the network back on. And I think if we give the Council access to this information, someone will eventually decide the risk is worth the reward. She had a point. A terrifying, entirely too plausible point. So, what do you propose? Mira walked over to her wall of notes, pulling down 3 sticky notes with coordinates written on them. We shut it down, ourselves, quietly, before anyone realizes what we are doing. That is insane. Yep. It would require traveling to 3 separate locations, accessing restricted Forerunner sites, and operating technology we barely understand. We could trigger the exact same response your grandmother did. Very possible. We could die. Extremely likely. She turned to face me, and I saw the same determination I had seen when she first laughed in the Grand Archive. But if we do nothing, and someone else finds this information, everyone could die. So really, it is a question of acceptable risk levels. I looked at her. This strange human with her grandmother's secrets and her absolute lack of self-preservation instincts. You are going to do this whether I help you or not, are you not? I mean, I would prefer help. My piloting skills are questionable at best, and I have been kicked out of 3 different flight simulators for what the instructors called crimes against physics. She grinned. But yeah, I am doing this either way. Of course she was. I will need to make arrangements, I said, already mentally cataloging what we would need. We cannot simply steal a ship and disappear. Actually, Mira said, pulling out yet another device from her seemingly bottomless bag, I may have already solved that problem. She activated the device, and a holographic figure appeared. A human male with graying hair and a smile that made me immediately distrust him. Chixtel, meet Captain James Foster of the Earth vessel Wayward Son. He is what humans call a smuggler, with a heart of gold and questionable legal standing. The hologram waved. Prefer the term independent contractor, but sure. Mira, you ready for pickup? You hired a smuggler? I asked, my voice climbing several octaves. I prefer to think of it as networking. She was throwing things into her bag now, apparently ready to leave immediately. Foster owes my family a favor. Several favors, actually. He has agreed to transport us to all 3 sites, no questions asked. I am asking questions, I protested, which is why you are not Foster. She sealed her bag and headed for the door. Look, we can debate the ethics of this later. Right now, we have a narrow window where everyone thinks I am still translating the manuscripts. Once they realize I am gone, they will start asking uncomfortable questions. This is a terrible plan. Got a better one? I did not. Which was perhaps the most frustrating part of all this. 12 hours later, I found myself aboard the Wayward Son, a ship that looked like it had been assembled from spare parts and pure determination. Captain Foster was exactly as trustworthy as he looked, which was to say, not at all. But his ship was fast, and he asked no questions about our cargo of jury-rigged technical equipment and Mira's increasingly frantic notes. The first Forerunner site was located on a dead moon in the Kepler system. According to Mira's translations, it housed the primary control node for the Nexus. In and out, she said as we approached. 20 minutes, tops. It took 3 hours. The site was protected by security systems that should not have still been functional after thousands of years. We triggered at least 5 of them, nearly got dissolved by some kind of energy field, and at one point, Mira had to physically crawl through a ventilation shaft, while I provided what she called moral support, which apparently meant watching nervously and making unhelpful suggestions. But we did it. Mira accessed the primary node, entered the first part of the shutdown sequence, and we escaped with only minor injuries and moderate trauma. 2 sites down, 1 to go. The third site was the problem. It was located in the Helix Nebula, in a region of space that was technically off-limits due to dangerous radiation levels. Also, it was currently occupied by a Thorian research team studying stellar phenomena. "We need a distraction," Foster said, studying the scans. "I have an idea," Mira said, and I learned to fear those words. Her plan involved convincing the Thorian team that their equipment was detecting an unprecedented stellar event that required immediate evacuation. How did she plan to convince them of this? By hacking their sensors and feeding them false data while I impersonated a council safety inspector. It should not have worked. It absolutely should not have worked. But 30 minutes later, the Thorian team was evacuating in a panic, and we were landing at the Forerunner site, with nothing between us and our goal, except several thousand years of accumulated cosmic dust, and whatever security systems remained active. The final control node was located deep within the site, in a chamber that Mira's notes indicated was some kind of central hub. The walls were covered in symbols that glowed faintly in the darkness, and in the center of the room stood a pedestal with what looked like a crystalline interface. "This is it," Mira whispered, approaching the pedestal with reverence. "The final node. Once I activate the shutdown sequence here, the entire nexus goes dark permanently." She pulled out her notebook, checking the sequence one last time. Her hands were shaking slightly. Whether from fear or excitement, I could not tell. "Mira," I said carefully, "what if your grandmother was wrong? What if the nexus is not dangerous? What if it could actually help us?" She looked at me, and for a moment, I saw the weight of 3 centuries pressing down on her. Then, I am making a terrible mistake. But Gran was not wrong about much, and I trust her more than I trust the possibility of easy answers. She placed her hands on the interface. The symbols on the walls flared to life, and I felt something vast and ancient stir in the darkness. For a moment, just a moment, I understood why Gran had been so afraid. There was something in the network, something that had been waiting with the patience of eons, and it knew we were there. Mira spoke the shutdown sequence in her grandmother's constructed language, her voice steady, despite the chaos erupting around us. The interface pulsed with each word, and the presence in the network pressed closer, like something trying to force its way through a closing door. The final word left her lips, and everything went dark. Not just the chamber, the entire network. I felt it collapse, felt millennia of connection sever in an instant. We stood in silence for a long moment. "Did it work?" I asked. Mira checked her scanner. "Yeah, the nexus is offline, permanently." She let out a breath that seemed to carry 300 years of family burden with it. "Gran can rest now." We made it back to Velcara Station 3 days later. The council was furious about our unauthorized departure, suspicious about our activities, and absolutely baffled by Mira's official report, which stated simply that the Oreth manuscripts were personal family documents of no scientific value. They did not believe her, of course, but they could not prove otherwise. And without the Nexus active, the Forerunner sites were just interesting archaeological curiosities again. Life returned to normal, or as normal as things got after humanity joined the galactic community. Mira went back to Earth, taking her grandmother's secrets with her. But before she left, she gave me something. A copy of the constructed language, complete with grammatical notes and her grandmother's original teaching materials. "Someone should know," she said. "Just in case, but someone I trust not to use it." I accepted the gift, understanding the weight of what she was giving me. "Your grandmother would be proud," I told her. "Yeah," she said, smiling that dangerous smile. "She probably would. But she would also tell me I was an idiot for not selling the translation rights to the council for a ridiculous amount of money." That was probably true. After she left, I returned to my normal work. But sometimes, late at night, I would study the language Elizabeth Hastings had created. A language designed to hide the galaxy's greatest secrets in plain sight. A language that had prevented disaster through nothing more than a grandmother's paranoia and a granddaughter's determination. And I would think about humanity, this strange species that had stumbled into our galactic community with their taped-together ships and their questionable decision-making skills. This species that could look at an impossible problem and simply solve it. Often in the most ridiculous way possible. The Council asked me once if I thought humanity would be an asset to galactic civilization. I thought about Mira, about her grandmother, about 300 years of secrets passed down through bedtime stories. Absolutely, I said, as long as we are very, very careful. Because here is what I learned from the Orath manuscripts incident. Humanity does not play by our rules. They do not think like us. They do not approach problems like us. And they absolutely do not respect the phrase, "that is impossible." Sometimes, that makes them dangerous. But sometimes, just sometimes, it makes them exactly what the galaxy needs. Even if they do show up late, pick food out of their teeth with data styluses, and solve ancient mysteries with nothing more than family stories and sheer stubborn determination. Especially then.